David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. The advantages of disadvantages and the disadvantages of advantages. The biblical narrative of David beating the giant Goliath has come to be regarded as the ultimate underdog success story in modern times. So much so that it has become synonymous with improbable victories. But was this victory really that improbable? Let us recount the events of this tale and see for ourselves. The event transpired during the battle between the Philistines and the Israelites in the valley of Elam, circa 11th century BC. After a standoff lasting several days, the Philistines sent their champion warrior, Goliath, for a one-on-one fight. Goliath was a behemoth, decked in armor and laced with deadly weapons. The Israelites did not have a match for Goliath. They did not expect to win, especially when a small shepherd boy named David volunteered. The king of Israel was initially reluctant to let him fight. After all, what do shepherds know about fighting, let alone fighting someone of Goliath's stature? When the boy insisted, the king offered him some armor and weapons he could use, but David declined, saying he only knows how to use a slingshot and use it well. David argued that he had defeated lions and wolves with the slingshot, and he could do the same against this giant as well. And that is precisely what he did. He approached Goliath, and before the giant could get close to him, he slung a stone at his head, knocking him out. David cemented his victory with the ultimate insult to injury, beheading the giant with the giant's own sword, thus putting an end to the war. David's victory primarily teaches us not to shy away from facing the giants in our lives, even if you're an underdog or a misfit. Even if society does not believe in you, you have what it takes to succeed. What many people ignore in the story of David and Goliath is that perceived weaknesses can become your biggest strengths in reality. Strengths that can help you emerge victorious. Let's re-examine the same story in light of this idea. Goliath was a giant, and modern-day science tells us that giantism results from acromegaly, a disorder of the pituitary gland that causes excessive secretion of growth hormones. So, while a gigantic build may seem like an advantage, especially in a one-on-one fight, the same translates into slow movements. This is why, according to the Bible, Goliath orders David to come to me. He cannot approach David himself, as he is too slow. And that's not all. Acromegaly has another side effect. It impairs vision. This explains why when Goliath sees David, he asks, "Why do you come to me with sticks?" David only had one stick, his shepherd's staff, in his hand. Knowing all this, you can now see how David's disadvantages, his small build, lack of armor, and inexperience with any weapon except the sling, helped him win the fight. And that is precisely the main takeaway here. Depending on the perspective, your disadvantages can become your biggest advantages. Moreover, what gives your opponent an advantage over you can, in fact, become their Achilles heel. Here is the thing, though. Just knowing this is not enough. Changing your perspective to turn the odds in your favor takes effort, which most people are unwilling to put in. And that is why improbable victories are so unbelievable. Instances in history where underdogs or misfits came out on top are always the result of the weaker side playing to its strengths and exploiting its opponent's weaknesses. When you refuse to follow the rules of the game like David did, bringing a gun or sling in this case to a sword fight, advantages and disadvantages cease to matter. The underdog stops being the underdog and instead becomes the favorite, capable of taking out a giant in one fell swoop. The theory of desirable difficulty. The biblical story proves that big is not always the best. Sometimes it's better to be the small fish in a big pond. An excellent example of this is with university education. The widespread belief in society is that those admitted to Ivy League schools are set for life, but statistics prove otherwise. Top graduates from these universities indeed do very well, but ever think of what becomes of the lower third of Harvard STEM majors? They do worse in the real world compared to the highest third of a small liberal arts college. And that's not all. Many more people drop out from Harvard's degree programs compared to smaller schools. This concludes that your performance in college is not really a product of your intelligence. After all, you must already be an outstanding student to get into Harvard. What it boils down to is your environment, who you measure yourself against. To sum it up, the societal perception that we can only achieve happiness by going bigger and doing better is false. Dyslexia is also something that's considered a disadvantage by society. However, history serves as proof that, more often than not, dyslexic people ended up doing remarkable things. And this is not in spite of their disadvantage, but because of it. From Steve Jobs and Henry Ford to Tommy Hilfiger and Richard Branson, the list of dyslexic leaders is never-ending. Why is that the case? Because the things you learn out of necessity are more powerful than the things that come easy. People with dyslexia, or any other disability for that matter, are forced to adapt to their environment to keep up. Because they are not good at reading and writing, they compensate for it by developing exceptional listening and communication skills. To compete with their peers on an equal footing, they go out of their way to devise new learning strategies, and this gives them an advantage unlike any other. There is one more thing many greats have in common. They lost one or both parents at an early age. In short, they went through one of the most traumatic experiences even before hitting puberty. And so, it forged their spirit and prepared them to face anything life threw at them. The situations and events supposed to kill them instead made them stronger, proving Nietzsche right. The fact that so many successful people in our society were disadvantaged at first shows that learning things out of necessity trumps natural skills or talent. This is the theory of desirable difficulty. If you perceive yourself as an underdog or a misfit, which all of us do at one point or another, focus on what you were told you can't or shouldn't do. Then ask yourself how you can take these disadvantages and turn them into advantages. How can you mirror David? At the end of the day, advantages and disadvantages are social constructs. What it comes down to is perception. How you perceive a situation determines your success or failure. The limits of power. It's true that having too little of something puts you at a disadvantage, but the same can be said for having too much of anything. That's what happened in Goliath's case. His excessive size became the reason for his downfall. This is universally true. Take the recent debate on classroom sizes, for instance. A lot of people think that classes with fewer students are better. Parents will even send their kids to schools that cost $50,000 a year just to have them in smaller classrooms. The idea is that students in such classes express themselves better. However, studies have proven that shrinking the class too much does not work. Students don't want to speak up when nobody else is speaking up, or rely on one person to do all the talking. Such scenarios make it all the more difficult for teachers to engage students in conversations. Well, what is the right approach then? To put it the way our elders did, everything is good in moderation. Let's look at a second example to drive our point home. A subject that will resonate with many people is wealth, specifically in the context of family and upbringing. There's no denying that when you don't have much money, it's challenging to be a good parent. You can't fulfill your child's basic needs, and in dealing with your financial woes, you cannot make sufficient time for them either. That said, the notion that having a lot of money magically makes everything easy is false. Wealth brings a different set of problems for parents. In lower-income households, children understand not to ask for the same thing again when told by their parents that they can't afford it. But when you have too much money, that excuse no longer flies. Now, parents must explain why they won't fulfill their child's every demand, and that is a lot harder. It's now clear that too much of anything is never a good idea. There is a limit to everything: the number of students in one class, how much money one should have, even power. History stands as proof that wars aren't won by might alone. A more recent example to demonstrate the limits of power is the implementation of the three strikes law in the U.S. It stipulated that for any second offense, a criminal's mandatory sentence will be doubled. And for a third offense, which could be something as minor as stealing a slice of pizza, you would go to jail for a minimum of 25 years and a maximum of life. Under this law, America's prison population doubled, and its per capita rate of indictment rose to 7 times that of Europe and Canada. But did increasing the penalty curb crime? According to several studies conducted over the years, not at all. In fact, some argue that it birthed many other problems in society. The issue, once again, lies with our assumption that if the penalties for criminal behavior are increased by a certain amount, crime will decrease by a roughly equivalent rate. In other words, people have this linear model in their heads, not just for crime, but for almost everything in life. More money leads to more happiness. Smaller classes lead to more engagement. Better schools lead to better job prospects. Except we now know it hardly ever works that way. To understand the limits of this law, you must change your perspective. Think about not just the direct effect of locking up an individual for life, but also what their absence might mean for the community they are a part of. When you remove someone from society, you remove the biggest predictor of a productive life for those around them. This is especially true in poor communities, where the incarcerated are often breadwinners. According to studies, a child whose father is put behind bars for life is 300% more likely to become a juvenile delinquent. Moreover, it puts them at a 200% increased risk of suffering from clinical depression. There was another interesting observation made by criminologists studying the three strikes law. The study found the average age of a person committing their third offense was 37. Before this law was implemented, that person would have served an average of 5 years, meaning they would have gotten out by the age of 42. How many crimes do you think criminals typically commit after that age? The answer is almost none. If you look at the age versus crime graph today, you will notice that statistically, crime rates past the age of 40 are non-existent. In short, the only thing the three strikes law was good for was locking up individuals who no longer posed any risk to society. This is not to say that we should stop penalizing crime altogether. Once again, moderation is the key. Find the ideal balance between deterring crime without having too drastic a consequence on society. And that is the crux of the matter, the reason people have trouble grasping this notion of moderation. We, as a society, must learn to look beyond the individual. We must understand that criminals don't act in isolation, that they have families depending on them. And if you target too many people like that, you're harming the people still at home. Similarly, understand that a student is part of an ecosystem in a classroom and is dependent on their peers. And so, if you take away too many of the peers, the classroom dynamic suffers. To connect this to our main argument, instead of going along with notions dictated by society, look at the bigger picture. Just because someone is stronger or has more money or commands more authority does not guarantee their win. Because imagine if giants won all the battles, there would be no hope for the rest of us. If the outcome of every contest is already decided, what then is the point of trying? But that's not true. The universe operates on the idea of balance, and so there are limits to power as well. Now, whether you choose to follow David's example and exploit that limit to come out on top or succumb to Goliath's might is up to you. In a nutshell, David's example teaches us not to shy away from facing the giants in our lives. Even if you're an underdog or a misfit, even if society does not believe in you, you have what it takes to succeed. Perceived weaknesses can actually end up becoming your biggest strengths. Instances of underdogs or misfits coming out on top are always the result of the weaker side playing to its strengths and exploiting its opponent's weaknesses. How you perceive a situation determines your win or failure. When you refuse to follow the rules of the game, advantages and disadvantages cease to matter, and the odds move in your favor. The societal perception that we can only achieve happiness by going bigger and doing better is false. Too much of anything is never a good idea. The intelligent approach is finding the middle ground. Learning things out of necessity always trumps natural skills or talent. This is the theory of desirable difficulty. We, as a society, must learn to look beyond the individual and understand that everyone is a part of a delicate ecosystem.